Good morning, YouTube. It is Monday, May 21st. I am on my way to the casino. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning. I've got a session that I need to recount from last week, from Wednesday, in fact, that I never got a chance to getting around to. Before we get into that, I'm going to be leaving for Los Angeles and Southern California on Wednesday, which will kind of give me a chance to probably catch up on a bunch of vlogs, because I don't think I'm going to be playing much poker for the week that I'm there. We're going to visit family, and generally when we go and do that, I don't really try to squeeze in poker. Obviously, there's a number of casinos in the LA area, but if I do go play, I'm going to go play at night, which then means I don't get much sleep, and that kind of ruins the next day for me for hanging out with family. So we'll see if I can get something in, maybe not. There is actually one session that I never wrote any hand histories on for the session before last Wednesday. It was the Tuesday session. I know how much you guys like results, so I ended up winning $488, and the only hand that I can remember from that, which pretty much defined my session, was a hand in which I flopped set over set. I raised pocket jacks. It comes like jack 6-4. I bet pocket sixes. There's a player in between who calls. Pocket sixes calls as well. Turns a 10. And I over jam, and of course pocket sixes calls with the set. It's a flush draw board, as well as obviously a number of straight draws. He thought I might have turned a set of 10s, but there's obviously nothing he can do in this situation. So I did cooler him there, and then lost a little bit of that back. So I ended up winning, like I said, 488 on Tuesday. And then Wednesday morning, when I came in, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. As I walked in, I saw it was a 3-5 game, and then I saw like there was what looked like a must-move game on a couple of tables away. I was really surprised. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Turns out it was actually a 5-10 PLO game running from the night before. So this is why it's important to be well-versed in a number of games. Obviously, I played PLO. When I looked at the lineup, I knew none of them were regulars, people that don't even play PLO. There was a couple of people who have never played PLO. So, of course, I jumped right in. And gave myself an advantageous situation, playing against people who had never really played before. So let's get into those hands. Unfortunately, it only lasted about 40 minutes before it broke, because obviously they had been playing all night. In this first hand, there is a lady to my right who says it's her first time playing. She limps for 10. I isolate ace king 8-6 with nut clubs to 50. The small blind calls, and she calls as well. We go 3 ways to a flop of ace queen 4 with 2 spades. I don't have any spades in my hand. They both check to me. In this situation with top pair, top kicker, my hand's not likely to improve, so I think betting here is fine. At the same time, though, if I do bet and get called, I'm going to have a hard time navigating. If I get check raised, I have to obviously fold, and I think if I get called, they're going to have just a myriad of different hands, and I'm going to have a hard time figuring out whether it's a spade draw, whether it's a pair and a gutter, things of that nature. So I check back for pot control. The turn is an offsuit 7, and now the small blind leads for 45. The lady calls, and for this small sizing with the nut gut shot and top, I'm obviously going to call. Sometimes I have the best hand here, and if I don't, obviously an offsuit 5 is going to make me the nuts. So I call. The river now is 10 of spades, and both players check. When they both check, I think it's fairly obvious neither of them has a big flush. It's possible I have the best hand here, but given their weakness, I think this is kind of a great spot to attack. I can tell neither of these players play a lot of PLO, so I think they're going to be pretty scared. If they don't have a flush, they're folding, and I think a lot of times they're not going to have a flush. On this flop, I'm going to check back some medium flush draws, hands that don't have much equity other than just a flush draw. So I decided to bet 220, and both players fold relatively quickly. It's possible that I had the best hand here with top pair, top kicker, but I'm obviously not going to check back in a situation where I kind of get the green light to bet large and hope that I can get them to fold some 2 pairs, sets, things of that nature. In this next hand, the lady opens the button to 25. I'm in the small blind with ace king 8-5, spades and diamonds, and 3 bets to $80. Big blind folds. She calls. We go heads up to a flop of 5-5-6 with 2 clubs. Obviously, I don't have any clubs. Flopping top trips here with ace 5. I'm going to be betting. There are a number of draws here, straight draws, flush draws, things of that nature. Over pairs, I think that can continue, or that should be continue. Pocket queens, pocket kings shouldn't be folding here. I bet 120 and 165. She tanks for a while and folds, and ends up telling me that she folded pocket kings, which kind of goes to show me that she's playing extremely fit or fold in PLO, which just isn't going to be profitable, especially three-handed. They had been previously playing I think like 6 or 7-handed. When I first jumped in, we were 6-handed. At this point, we got down to 3-handed, and I'm basically aware of the fact that I can just be 3-betting and opening and c-betting just a myriad of flops, because these players are just essentially going to continue only when they flop really large. You know, she's lucky here that she did fold pocket kings because she was beat. But if she's folding pocket kings, you know, in this, 3-bet situation where she flops an overpair, I think she's just going to have a really hard time winning, especially against players who are, more well-versed and who are going to be attacking her play. She ended up saying afterwards that she liked Pot Limit Omaha because she felt like people didn't really bluff as much, which I think could be the case. When you're playing with players who don't know what they're doing, they're a lot more afraid of betting when flushes get there, if they don't have a flush, things of that nature. But, truth be told, once she gets into a game with people who know what they're doing, they're going to be attacking her a lot. And she's just going to have a really hard time winning if she's not going to be continuing with hands that, aren't necessarily like the nuts. So after this hand, unfortunately, the game breaks shortly thereafter. I pretty much started like opening and 3-betting a bunch 3-handed, and neither of the players was defending. The other player that was playing kind of realized what was going on, realized, he was just essentially handing off like $15 every single hand. So he decided he was done, and obviously she wasn't interested in playing heads up. So we broke the game. I ended up winning a little bit over 500 in like 40 minutes, which is nice. Obviously, ran good. I didn't run bad. So it kind of goes to show you, the situations you could put yourself in. If you play all the mixed games, all the limit games, and you walk into a casino and you see the best game in the house is a game that doesn't necessarily always run, or that other players that are playing in don't know what they're doing in, you're going to be able to jump in. You don't want to just be a one-trick pony. And also, No Limit Hold'em isn't, the most fun game. There are other really fun games. So I encourage you to play other games and get good at other things, because it's going to open up your mind as to how to play even in No Limit Hold'em. You're going to see situations that you maybe didn't really think of before because of how you're playing in a different game. Anyway, we are now at the casino. Got a few more hands from that day once we jumped into 3-5 that I'm going to get into in a bit.
5 minutes later.
All right, now waiting at the casino. I'm first up, so let's get back into those hand histories. There's a limp under the gun. It's a pretty aggressive opponent who likes to open a lot pre-flop. So I think when he limps here, I've seen him do it a lot of times with pocket pairs, suited connectors, things of that nature that he just doesn't want to raise himself. So I isolate to 25 with King Jack offsuit, and sure enough, he limp calls. We go heads up to a flop of Jack 8-8 with 2 clubs. He checks and I check back. I think on this draw heavy board, I want to have a check back range of some medium strength hands. I don't think I can necessarily go 3 streets, and if I get check raise on this flop, a lot of times it's going to be some 8s, some flush draws, some combo draws, and it's going to be hard for me to continue for multiple barrels on various runouts. I've done this before, and I said I didn't really like it, but I think it's actually okay in certain situations, especially against aggressive opponents who I think are going to assume that I have a lot of ace highs here and who are going to barrel off on the turn and river. The turn is an offsuit 5, and now he bets 30 into me. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere. I call. The river is the king of clubs, completing the flush, and now he bets 65. Once he bets into me here, when I've made top 2, I'm obviously not going to be folding. It doesn't look like I ever have a flush, so it's a great spot for him to continue barreling to represent the flush draws. I call, and he announces queen high. Looks like maybe he had queen 10, queen 9 for a gut shot. Maybe I can get a couple of streets of value if I do bet. But like I said, if he decides to get crazy here and check raise on the flop, I might end up folding the turn, possibly the river once the flush gets there. And now he's check raise flop and barreled off. I'm just going to think he's going to have a lot of flushes by a river. So you got to give yourself some situations here against aggressive opponents who can turn their hands into bluffs on boards such as these.
5 hours later.
Okay, let's get into the remainder of the hands. After that King Jack hand, I move myself over to another game where there seems to be this action player. It looks like he's actually bluffed a couple of times in a row, or at least what he's proclaimed to be bluffs. He's shown a couple of bluffs, so you can just kind of tell he's been an action player. He says he's been playing Baccarat, won some money over there, and now he's come over here to lose it. So he's at least portraying that image that he's been action. There's a nit who limps early position. I limp Jack 10 suited, which is something I'm not going to do very often, but after the nit limps, I think a lot of these players like to limp re-raise. I don't want to get involved in that kind of nonsense, so I limp as well. The action player now makes it 35. It folds back to the nit. He ends up folding, Not entirely sure what the heck he's limping under the gun and limp folding to the action player's raise. I call 30 more with Jack 10 suited. Obviously, I'm not folding this, especially against the one guy that I want to be playing hands with. The flop comes Ace King 10 Rainbow. I check and he bets 40. A pretty small bet. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere here with bottom pair and a gut shot against a guy who could really be having any 2 cards. I call. The turn now is the 8 of hearts, bringing 2 hearts. I check and he bets 140. This is a situation where I'm almost always just going to fold to most players. You know, two streets of aggression here. My hands is not going to be doing well. It's just unlikely that he's going to have a complete air ball. But against this specific opponent, I think that when he raises large here pre-flop, this is a great board for him to keep repping on. So again, I just decided I don't really want to fold. This is probably a mistake. I think against an aggressive opponent, it's just better to fold here and find a better spot because he's often not going to give up on the river if he does have some sort of air ball, and I'm obviously not going to improve often enough unless I specifically hit the queen, of course. So I called 140, which again, like I said, I don't love. The river is now the 3 of hearts, bringing 3 hearts. It comes backdoor hearts. I check, and he blasts 460. I really want to call here. It feels like he's bluffing, given that he's been bluffing so much. This seems like a line that he'd been taking. I think about it for a while, and what it comes down to is I feel like I can just find better hands to be calling him with. Obviously, he could be turning a lot of hands into bluffs here, like king, queen, king, jack, things of that nature that he thinks like he can get to fold an ace. You know, my hands don't even beat a lot of his bluffs. Similarly, because he's been showing so many bluffs, I feel like this is a great spot for him to finally get value. And it actually feels like he might have backdoored hearts here. I think if the river isn't a heart, I'd be more likely to call. I tanked for a while and ultimately just kind of come to the decision that, again, I could find better hands to be calling with here. Obviously, if I have like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, king, queen, king, jack, things of that nature that can block the straight, queen, jack specifically. There's just so many more hands I could be having than trying to hero him here with jack 10. So I fold, and later on he ends up telling me that he ended up backdooring the nuts with ace x of hearts, and I actually believe him. As anyone that watches this channel knows, I like to mix things up. So in this hand, I'm not going to play the hand from my perspective, but rather from somebody else's. There's an early position open to 30 in a straddle pot of 3, 5, 10. I call 30. Player after me calls 30, and now the action player has pocket queens. He makes it 110. The original opener folds. I call 80 more. The player in between calls, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 3, 4, 7 with 2 clubs. I check. The player after me checks, and now the pre-flop 3-better bets 160. Now it's on me, and I'm in raised to 320. The player in between folds, and the player with pocket queens goes into the tank. He legitimately looks like he's got a tough decision. I actually, from my perspective, I actually didn't think he had much of a hand here. He's playing about 700 more behind his bet, so if he were to ship all in, it'd be like 500 more to me. He ends up showing his hand to some people. He tanks for a little bit more, and I'd like to know what you're doing here with pocket queens against me, min-raising on this 3, 4, 7, 2 club flop. What do you think my most likely hands are? You know, it looks like a set. Do you think sometimes I'm just going to have hands like ace king suited, ace jack suited for the nut flush draw, things of that nature? What are you doing here with pocket queens? Please comment below and let me know. So from my perspective, I actually didn't think he had much of a hand here. This is the same player who said he was the background player, said he was the action player. Considering his bet sizing on this flop, I actually thought a lot of times he was going to have like ace high here and just was going to get out of line. Obviously, if he has overpairs, I expect him to just get the money in, and I didn't think he'd be folding pretty much anything he had for a min raise. He seemed like the type of guy that'd be like, what, a min raise? There's just never any way I'm folding to this. Like, what the heck do you ever have? So I actually thought that my min raise here was going to work against overpairs as well as just ace highs. Perhaps it's best to just call with my hands. Obviously, I guess now would be the time to let you know what I had. I ended up having 6-5 of diamonds and just flopping the nuts. I think possibly the best situation here is to just call, but I think what I'm going to call here, it's going to slow a lot of people down on some various runouts, like if the turn's a club. I don't want him to check back sometimes. I just thought if he's going to have an overpair, he's always going to get it in. And even if he has a hand like ace king, I didn't think he would ever fold to a min raise, so I thought that would kind of set up a perfect turn shove. The player in between folds, and unfortunately for me, this quote-unquote action player with pocket queens ends up folding. So obviously a pretty big disaster on my part to be min-raising this flop. If I raise larger, maybe he gets it in because he thinks that I'm not likely to have a hand. I don't know what it was. I guess the min raise got him. Obviously, exploitatively, I'm never min raising here, with like pocket 10s or anything like that. But he doesn't know that. I thought he was kind of an action player. I thought that if he has any value hands, he's going to get it in. And similarly, even if he has I actually didn't think there was any hand he was going to fold to a min raise here. I thought even if he has a hand like 10 high, he was just going to jam because it gives him kind of the perfect sizing for him to bluff me off my hand. Obviously a mistake, because if I think he's going to do that, then I should be just check calling the flop and let him continuing barrel on the turn with all of his air balls. Like I said, I actually kind of thought he might have an overpair, and I didn't think he'd fold it. So, another lesson here, if you kind of flop the nuts in a situation like this, maybe sometimes it's best to just slow play it, because sometimes even those opponents who you think are crazy and wild can make some good folds. Now, in this final hand of note, I pick up ace king of spades in early position. I open to 25. The player to my immediate left calls, and the big blind calls as well. We go three ways to a flop of deuce 3-5 with 2 spades. So I flop 2 overs, the nut flush draw, and a gut shot. The big blind checks. I bet 40 into 70. The aforementioned player right after me calls, and now the big blind calls as well. The turn is an offsuit 7, which I think is a much better card for the other two players' ranges. They're both sitting relatively short. The big blind has 400, and the player after me has 300. The big blind now checks. I'm in an awkward spot here given the pot size. I think if I bet, I'm going to have to be betting somewhere around 150, maybe 140. With the player behind me having 300, it really sets up an awkward situation where now he jams, I'm going to have to call, which I think is fine. Also, the other player, same thing. If I bet some sizing like 110 and he jams, I'm going to have to call. Or if they just end up flatting me, it puts me in a really awkward spot if I brick the river. So I decide to check here. The player after me now bets 150, half of his stack. The big blind calls. Obviously now I'm getting great odds to be calling once again with my nut flush draw. And what I assume are 2 overs. I think they're both live. I'm thinking about jamming here, but given that the player now is like 250 left, this seems like suicide. I don't think he's ever folding, and it just doesn't seem like a great spot. Obviously, the player that bets 150, I don't expect him to ever fold either. So just jamming here with like 2 overs and a flush draw and the straight draw just seems like just silly. So I end up just calling. Unfortunately, the river is a 3, pairing the board, and I end up having just ace king high. The big blind checks, I check, and now the player to my immediate left snap bets all in. It ends up being actually about 180, 170, something like that. I'm not 100% sure. The big blind folds, and I'd like to know what you're doing here. Are you always just snapping this off with ace king high? What are the bluffs you think this player has, considering he is the first player to be calling the 25 after I open? What do you think his most likely hands are here when he calls the flop and then bets turn and jams river?
A lot of boring math later.
After a little bit of consideration, I just think the pot's too big. I don't think I could fold. I think he could have a few different flush draws, queen jack suited, queen 10 suited, things of that nature that could miss. There are some straight draws that I think he could have here that have missed as well. It just feels like, to me, it felt like he was bluffing, which obviously he could be bluffing with some better hands, but it just felt like he was bluffing. So I call like super quick. He ends up telling me, good call. Obviously, considering I have ace king high, I'm still a little bit worried because he thinks it's possibly has a hand like 3-4 for a pair of threes and thinks he's bluffing. I wait, he waits. Finally, he rolls over ace queen high with the queen of spades. So I don't really know what he's doing here. I think this is obviously just best as a fold, maybe even check back on the turn. I can see how on this flop he doesn't want to fold ace queen high, and then on the turn when it checks to him he decides to bet. I think if he is going to be betting, he should just be jamming it all in here on the turn, over bet jamming, because he leaves himself with a really awkward size, or betting smaller. If he had bet 100 on the turn and then jams the river for like 240, I might have ended up actually just finding a fold. So obviously that was a really nice situation for me between the sessions of PLO and these 3-5 sessions that day. I ended up winning about $940, I think it was. I actually ended up coming back later that evening with a buddy for a night session he wanted to play with me. So I headed back and ended up winning about 160 during that like 2-hour session as well. So pretty nice day, won 1100 the day before my birthday or 2 days before my birthday. I don't know. It's all spun around now. Anyway, that's all for that session. Things have been going excellent. Thanks for tuning in, checking everything out. I really appreciate all the support. All right, guys, have a good night.